Summer, 1944. A convoy of trucks rattled down a dusty road in rural Texas, carrying Japanese prisoners of war fresh from the Pacific battlefields. Exhausted, thin, and still proud, they expected to be met with hostility, even fear. Instead, as the trucks slowed past a small town, children ran to the roadside. Boys in overalls and girls in dresses waved, pointed, and whispered excitedly. Their faces showed curiosity, but no fear. One POW later recalled in his diary, "We were warriors of the Emperor. We had fought on islands where even American soldiers hesitated. Yet their children stood before us, laughing, unafraid. It was a wound deeper than capture. The prisoners lowered their eyes, expecting insults or stones. Instead, the children leaned closer, shouting questions. Are they really Japanese? Do they speak English? Do they eat rice every day?" The guards chuckled and waved the children back, but they made no effort to shield them. To the POWs, this was shocking. Back in Japan, children were taught to tremble at the thought of the enemy. One soldier whispered to his comrade, "Why do they not fear us? Have they not been told who we are?" The answer came in silence. The children's courage was proof that the prisoner's aura of terror had vanished. A diary captured the humiliation. "In battle, we were demons. Here we are curiosities. Even the smallest child mocks our pride by showing no fear." For Japanese soldiers raised in a culture of discipline and reverence, the laughter of children was unbearable. They had lived by the sword, but now faced defeat in the eyes of the young. The guards noticed the prisoners' discomfort. One sergeant remarked, "Funny, isn't it? Our kids are braver than their soldiers," the POWs heard, and their shame deepened. For the children, the sight was simple curiosity, but for the prisoners, it was the sharpest humiliation, to be reduced from feared warriors to harmless strangers that even children dared approach. One POW wrote, "We expected to be hated. Instead, we were laughed at. This I could not endure." The moment revealed a truth more painful than hunger or captivity. America's children, well-fed and confident, had grown in freedom without fear of enemies. The Japanese soldiers realized they were no longer symbols of strength. To the next generation of Americans, they were little more than defeated men behind barbed wire. The shock had only begun. In the weeks that followed, the Japanese POWs settled into their camps across the American South and Midwest. The barbed wire kept them in, but it could not keep out the curiosity of local children. Almost every afternoon, groups of boys and girls gathered along the fences. They pressed their faces against the wire, pointing, whispering, and giggling at the prisoners inside. To the prisoners of war, it was humiliating. They had expected to terrify Americans, yet here, children treated them as though they were animals in a zoo, something to be studied, not feared. One POW wrote bitterly in his diary, "Their children stand without guards, without fear, laughing at us as though we are clowns. In Japan, even mothers feared our enemies. Here, even children mock us. The guards allowed it, sometimes even joking with the children." They explained that the men behind the wire were soldiers, but no longer dangerous. The children laughed louder, waving as though greeting old friends. Some children shouted questions. "Do you eat with chopsticks? Can you say hello in English? Did you fight in the war?" Their innocence stung more than insults could. The POWs tried to ignore them, but the laughter pierced deeper than bullets. For warriors raised to demand respect, being mocked by children felt like the final collapse of honor. One soldier whispered, "We lived as tigers, but here we are seen as kittens." His comrade lowered his head, unable to answer. The children, unknowing, kept visiting, sometimes bringing candy or throwing small stones of curiosity, not to harm, but to provoke a reaction. They never flinched, never showed fear. A historian later observed, "For Japanese POWs, the sight of fearless children was more devastating than barbed wire. It stripped away the last illusion of power." The laughter at the fence became a daily reminder that the war was truly lost, not because of weapons, but because the next generation of Americans saw the enemy not as monsters, but as beaten men. One POW summed it up. To be mocked by a soldier is war. To be laughed at by a child is defeat. And still, the worst was yet to come. When POWs worked on farms and saw American children, not only laugh at them, but give them orders without hesitation. The humiliation was only deepening. By autumn, many Japanese POWs were sent to work on American farms, harvesting crops, repairing fences, and tending livestock. They expected hard labor under strict guards. Instead, they faced something even harder to accept. Often, the farmers were busy in the fields or markets, leaving their children, sometimes no older than 12 or 13, to direct the prisoners' work. The POWs bent their backs to cut hay or load wagons, while American boys barked instructions and girls pointed out mistakes. The warriors of the Pacific now labored under the voices of children. One POW recorded bitterly, "We once charged into machine gun fire without hesitation. Now I carry water when a child tells me to. It is worse than death." The humiliation was doubled by the children's boldness. They gave orders without hesitation, as though the enemy soldiers were nothing more than farm hands. The prisoners tried to hold on to their pride, but the reality was undeniable. These children were unafraid, confident, and commanding, qualities that cut against everything the POWs believed about themselves. A boy once shouted, "Hey, you Mr. Rao! Do it again." The guards laughed, and the prisoners obeyed in silence. One diary captured the sting. To be defeated by men is war. To be ordered by children is humiliation beyond war. The POWs realized that America's strength did not rest only in its soldiers, but in its youth, children so secure, so fearless they could mock and command prisoners without a trace of fear. The contrast to Japan was devastating. At home, children were raised to bow, obey, and tremble before authority. Here, they stood tall, laughing and shouting at enemy soldiers without hesitation. One POW whispered, "Their children live like generals. Ours live like beggars," and with every passing day on the farms, the prisoners felt their pride erode further. Not only conquered by America's armies, but by its children. The humiliation was now unbearable, yet the lessons were only beginning. For soon the POWs would discover that American children were not only fearless, they were stronger, taller, and healthier than many of Japan's own soldiers. A revelation that would wound them even deeper. On the farms and in the small towns, Japanese POWs began to notice something else, something that cut even deeper than children's laughter or boldness. The American children were tall, taller than many of the prisoners themselves. Some boys, only 14 or 15, looked nearly as strong as grown soldiers. The prisoners whispered among themselves, unsettled. Back in Japan, even adults were often shorter and thinner, their diets limited by scarcity. Here, children grew broad-shouldered, well-fed, and confident. One POW wrote with shame, "I saw a boy whose head rose above mine. He could not have been more than 15. Yet I, a soldier of the emperor, stood smaller. It was a humiliation I could not hide." Girls, too, appeared healthier than the prisoners had imagined. Their cheeks were full, their hair shiny, their steps quick and strong. Even they carried themselves with the confidence of abundance. The POWs realized with dread that these children, so fearless, so tall, would one day be the soldiers of America. And if today's boys already dwarfed them, what chance could Japan's armies have tomorrow? One guard, sensing their unease, joked, "Our kids eat more meat in a week than you did in a month." The words stung because they were true. The prisoners thought of their own children back home, small, hungry, thin from rationing. The contrast was unbearable. American youth grew on milk, meat, and vegetables. Japanese youth grew on rice and scarcity. A diary captured the despair. We were told America was weak, its people decadent. But I see their children, and I know the truth. Our defeat was decided before we ever fired a shot. The laughter of children no longer sounded like mockery. It sounded like victory. The confidence of a generation raised in plenty, unafraid of soldiers who had once seemed invincible. For the prisoners of war, this realization was more crushing than the battlefield. They had been conquered not just by American armies, but by the strength of American children. And yet another shock awaited them. Not only were American children stronger, they were free. They spoke boldly, questioned authority, and carried themselves with a confidence Japanese children were never allowed to show. For men raised in a culture of strict obedience, this freedom was a revelation, as painful as it was undeniable. The humiliation was now turning into recognition. If the size and strength of American children had stunned the POWs, their behavior shocked them even more. In Japan, children bowed to adults, spoke softly, and lived under constant discipline. In America, they saw something entirely different. On farms, boys shouted to their fathers, arguing about chores. Girls laughed loudly in public, chasing each other without shame. Children interrupted adults, asked bold questions, even teased their own parents. To the Japanese prisoners, it was a startling sight. Back home, such behavior would have brought scolding or punishment. Here, it was normal. One POW recorded, "The children speak freely, without fear. They laugh loudly, as though the world belongs to them." In Japan, children are silent shadows. Here they are voices that cannot be ignored. Even more unsettling was how American adults responded. Fathers ruffled their children's hair instead of striking them. Mothers smiled at their boldness rather than silencing them. The POWs whispered to one another, "If their children speak this way, what kind of men will they grow to be?" The answer filled them with dread. One day, a boy no older than 12 shouted across a field to a group of prisoners, "Hey, you missed a spot!" The guards laughed. The boy stood tall, unafraid of men who had once carried rifles into battle. A POW admitted later, "It was not the guards who broke our pride. It was the children, speaking as though they commanded us. For men trained in strict obedience, the freedom of American youth was disorienting. It revealed a society where confidence was taught from birth, where children already lived with a sense of authority. The Japanese soldiers realized that this freedom, combined with abundance, created something far more dangerous than armies. It created generations unafraid of enemies. One diary summed it up. "We had been taught that America was weak, soft, and spoiled. But I see now strength begins in their children. The laughter of children at the fence, their bold voices on the farms, their fearless stares, these became the POW's daily reminder that they were not only defeated, but that the next generation of Americans had already surpassed them. And soon, the POWs would discover yet another humiliation. American children were not only fearless in spirit, they were better nourished, healthier, and even dressed more richly than many Japanese soldiers had ever been. The shock of abundance would deepen. On Sundays and afternoons off, Japanese POWs sometimes glimpsed American families beyond the camp fences. What struck them most was not the soldiers guarding them, but the children walking freely beside their parents. These children carried toys, wore clean shoes, and often clutched candy bars or apples. To men who had fought on half rations of rice and dried fish, the sight was almost surreal. One POW wrote in his diary, "Their children eat better than our soldiers. Their cheeks are round, their clothes neat, their hands full of sweets. In Japan, even officers' children go hungry." The shock deepened in the schoolyards. Prisoners working nearby saw American children open lunch pails filled with sandwiches, fruit, and milk. Some left food uneaten, tossing scraps without care. The POWs exchanged glances of disbelief. Their own children back home would have fought for a crust of bread, yet here, American children wasted food as if it had no value. One soldier whispered to his comrade, "Our youth will grow thin and weak. Theirs will grow tall and strong. The war is already lost." Even the clothing amazed them. Overalls without patches, shoes without holes, dresses of bright colors, proof of a nation untouched by scarcity. A historian later remarked, Japanese POWs realized that American abundance began not in the camps, but in the smallest households. Children themselves carried the evidence of victory. The prisoners tried to hold on to pride, but the truth was undeniable. America's strength was visible, not just in factories or armies, but in its children, fed, clothed, and unafraid. One POW confessed years later, "I felt more defeated watching a child eat freely than when I laid down my rifle. That child was stronger than my country." The abundance of American childhood was a weapon greater than any bomb. It created confidence, health, and fearlessness, qualities the POWs saw in every smiling face. And soon they would realize the final humiliation. American children not only lived in abundance, but they mocked the prisoners without hesitation, laughing openly at the men who once inspired terror. The sting of laughter would become their sharpest wound. The humiliation was now complete. For weeks, the Japanese POWs had endured the stares of American children. But soon, stares turned to something sharper: laughter. At camp fences, boys pointed at the prisoners' ragged uniforms and thin frames, giggling as if at a circus. Girls whispered to one another, covering their mouths and laughing when a POW tripped or stumbled under a heavy load. The prisoners bowed their heads, ashamed. To be mocked by soldiers was one thing, but to be laughed at by children, children who should have trembled at their sight, was unbearable. One diary recorded the sting. "Their laughter pierced deeper than bullets. We had fought as demons of the emperor, but here we were clowns, reduced to amusement for children." The humiliation grew worse on farms. When prisoners of war struggled with American tools, children laughed and shouted corrections. Sometimes they mimicked the prisoners' accents or strange gestures, their voices ringing with fearless joy. The guards didn't intervene. To them, it was harmless fun. But to the POWs, it was another wound to their honor. One soldier muttered to his comrade, "In Japan, children bow when warriors pass. Here they laugh. We are no longer warriors." The prisoners tried to ignore it, but laughter has a power of its own. It stripped them of pride, of fear, of the respect they once commanded on battlefields. A historian later reflected, "For Japanese POWs, the laughter of American children was more devastating than barbed wire. It meant their power had not only been broken, but erased." Even decades later, veterans admitted the memory stayed with them. One confessed, I did not fear their guns as much as I feared the sound of their children laughing at me. The prisoners knew then that the war was truly lost, not only in the Pacific, but in the hearts of America's next generation. The children did not see enemies. They saw defeated men and laughed without fear. For the prisoners of war, that laughter became the cruelest echo of their captivity. And yet behind that laughter lay a deeper truth. America's strength was not only in weapons or food, but in raising children so confident they could laugh at their enemies without hesitation. A lesson the prisoners would never forget. By now, the Japanese POWs had accepted the laughter of American children as part of daily life. But beneath the humiliation, a deeper realization began to take hold. These children were not just unafraid. They were the future of America. Strong, well-fed, confident. They carried themselves like heirs to victory. Boys who played baseball in the afternoons looked already like soldiers in the making. Girls, bold and outspoken, mirrored the same confidence. A POW noted in his diary, "We see their children run free, laughing at us. They will grow into men and women stronger than we are. Against such a generation, Japan cannot prevail." The guards themselves encouraged this fearlessness. They let children approach the fences, ask questions, even laugh at the prisoners. To them, it was proof that America had nothing to fear from its enemies, not even within reach of its children. The POWs realized that in Japan, children were trained to obey and endure. In America, children were trained to speak, question, and command. The contrast was devastating. One soldier whispered bitterly, "Our children hide behind walls. Theirs stand at the fence, unafraid of us." His words echoed through the barracks that night. Historians would later reflect, the defeat of Japan was not written only on the battlefield. It was written in the confidence of American children who treated captured soldiers as powerless. The POWs came to understand that America's strength was generational. It was not just factories and fields, but the way its children lived, healthy, fearless, certain of their place in a land of plenty. One veteran later confessed, "The children broke us more than the soldiers, for they showed us that Japan had lost not only the present, but the future." Every laugh at the fence, every bold word on the farms, every fearless stare from young eyes became proof that America's coming generation was already victorious. For the Japanese prisoners, this was the deepest wound. Not that they had been defeated in war, but that they had been dismissed, even mocked, by those who represented tomorrow. The fearless generation was growing before their eyes, and it left no doubt Japan's future could not compete. The POWs had lost not only their honor, but their place in history. And as they watched American children laugh and play, they knew that their defeat would echo long after the war was over. It was a realization heavier than chains. At night in the barracks, the laughter of American children echoed in the minds of the Japanese POWs. It reminded them not only of their defeat, but of their own children, far away in a starving homeland. They imagined sons who bowed silently to elders, daughters who never raised their eyes, children who went to bed hungry on bowls of rice watered thin. In America, they had seen the opposite, children bold, confident, and full. One POW wrote in his diary, "My son is small for his age. He does not laugh loudly. He does not question me. Here I see children half his age laughing at us, taller, stronger, unafraid. It tears my heart in two." Letters from Japan spoke of ration lines, of school children fainting from hunger, of families surviving on barley, sweet potatoes, and weeds. The contrast was unbearable. The prisoners whispered in shame, "Our children grow thinner every month. while theirs grow taller every year. The war is lost in their stomachs, a historian later reflected. For Japanese POWs, the humiliation of captivity was doubled by memory. They ate enough, even too much, while their children starved at home, and they saw American children thriving in freedom. Some prisoners tried to send more letters, though censors rarely let details of food or children's health pass. Still, their guilt grew heavier with every passing day. One soldier confessed in despair, "I cannot face my daughter's eyes when I return. She will see that I ate while she went hungry. She will see that even American children laughed at me." The memory of their own children became both a comfort and a torment. Comfort, because they longed for home. Torment, because they feared their children would never live as freely and strongly as the American children they had seen. The contrast was absolute. Japanese children lived under obedience and scarcity. American children lived under confidence and plenty. The POWs realized this was not only a war between nations, but between generations, and Japan's next generation was already defeated before it could grow. For the prisoners, this truth was the deepest humiliation of all. Their own children, hungry and silent, stood in their minds beside American children, well-fed, fearless, and laughing without fear. One diary ended with a line that captured it all. "We lost the war not to men, but to children. Their laughter broke us more than any bomb." The memory of home had become a wound that would never heal. When the war finally ended, Japanese POWs boarded ships home. They returned to a land scarred by bombings, where food was scarce and children's faces were thin with hunger. Yet the images that haunted them most were not of battlefields, but of children across the ocean, American children who had laughed at them without fear. One former POW admitted decades later, "I saw their planes, I saw their tanks, but nothing broke me like their children, who looked into my eyes without fear." In villages across Japan, returning soldiers compared notes. Many told the same story, of children in America who mocked them, questioned them, even commanded them. The memory burned worse than defeat on the battlefield. A historian wrote, "The humiliation was not in chains, but in laughter." The Japanese POWs discovered that America's strength lay not only in weapons, but in raising a generation unafraid of its enemies. Some veterans carried bitterness, others carried awe. All carried the memory of abundance and confidence in American youth, a memory that reshaped their understanding of the war. One soldier reflected, "We believed fear kept order. But in America, it was freedom that gave their children strength." This was the lesson we never forgot. Over time, as Japan rebuilt, the memory transformed. The laughter that once cut like a wound became a reminder of what was possible. A society where children lived without hunger, without fear, with voices that carried freely. The POWs, who had once felt humiliated, came to recognize it as a vision of a different future. Some even admitted that the strength of American children inspired them to want more for their own. And yet the sting of that first laughter never faded. They were warriors of an empire, but to the next generation of America, they had been little more than defeated men behind fences. The sound of children laughing, bold and fearless, was the truest echo of Japan's defeat. Not bombs, not battles, but the confidence of youth raised in freedom marked the end of their cause. And so, for the rest of their lives, the POWs carried that memory. The day they learned that the strongest weapon America possessed was not its armies, but its children, a lesson never forgotten.